Susan E. Mohr, spelled M-O-H-R, of 6407 West Reynolds, Hazlet, Michigan, 48840. Susan's phone number is area code 517-339-8770. Her work phone number is 377-4545, same area code. The recording was made on June 9th, 1992 at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River by Jim Walkinshaw. This is tape number 1 of 3 tapes. Hey, Susan, if you would just start with your name and your address and your phone number for us, please.
Okay, my name is Susan Mohr. My address is 6407 West Reynolds. That's in Hazlet, Michigan, 48840. My home phone is 517-339-8770, and my work phone is 517-377-4545. Easy number.
Correct. Why don't you just take us back to when you started working at the plant and what was going on and what you were doing?
Well, when I started working, actually, I wanted to tell you the story about how I got here.
That's probably a good story, too.
Well, it's an interesting story because I was a civil engineer, not a mechanical engineer by training, and I worked at the highway department. And I was a pool player. I played pocket billiards as a hobby. And Oldsmobile had a pool league then, and a lot of the guys from Oldsmobile played pool, but most of them were hourly guys. And they played pool at the pool hall that I played at all the time. And I was up there one night playing by myself, and this guy came up to me in his old farmer boots and his work pants and a white t-shirt with the arms rolled up, you know, kind of in the 50s style. And he came up and asked me if I wanted to shoot pool with him so he could warm up for the Oldsmobile Pool League. And I said, sure, I'd play with him. And we started playing, and, you know, we just started talking. He asked me about my job, and, you know, I told him I worked for the highway department, but I wasn't real happy there. He asked me what I did, and I told him I was an engineer, and he asked me why I wasn't happy, and I explained to him, you know, that construction was not a good place to be for women at that time. I was the first woman ever hired by the state to work on road construction. And it's what I really wanted to do, but it was very stressful. The men weren't very accepting of having women there. And he said, well, if you ever decide you want to change jobs, come over and talk to me at Oldsmobile. And he scribbled his name on the back of a napkin. And I said, yeah, sure. You know, this guy works out on the line. I don't want to go work on the line. You know, but frankly, I'm from the UP, so I didn't even know what a line was. You know, I mean, I didn't even know Oldsmobile was part of General Motors. I just knew they made cars, and that's about all I knew. Well, you know, I went back into work at the highway department, and I got to the point where one of the construction engineers asked me one time too many what a pretty girl like me was doing in a job like that. And I just said, that's it. And I'm not coming back here again. And I phoned up this guy, and I went over to see him. Well, this guy happens to be Ron Haas. You know, I get all dressed up and I go into the Olds. And here's Ron Haas. He's the head of R&T, reliability and test as it's called now. Back then, it was just test engineering. So he had this big glass office, a huge glass office, and my home is from the UP. Like I said, it's a real small town. So I walk into this big building. I'd never seen a factory in my life. Barely knew what they made here. And I walk into this big building, and here's Ron Haas from farmer to business suit. And I was very impressed, needless to say. But that's, to make a long story short, that's how I got my job at General Motors, playing pool. So my original plan was to come here for 1 year. That was my objective. Really? Yeah, when I graduated from college, I had a 10-year plan. And my 10-year plan was to get out and establish my credentials as an engineer. And to do that, I needed to work in an engineering capacity. And then I wanted to go back to school and get my MBA, and then come back out of school and work in a technical business capacity, a manager of technical people. and do that long enough to establish my credentials, and then go back and get my PhD. And by the end of 10 years, be a professor in a technical management school like MIT or Michigan Tech or U of M or something like that, where engineers go for business. So my game plan was to come to GM for 1 year, long enough to earn some money and establish my credentials as an engineer, and then go back and finance my education. Well, 15 years later, I'm still here, but I do have an MBA. I'm just a little off of my 10-year plan. Yeah. So I came into R&T and
When was that?
test engineering. That was in October 1st of 1977.
So that's kind of your higher end date.
That is my day one. I showed up for work, and they started all engineers at the time in the lab, so you could learn how to build fixtures. And the theory was you needed to learn how to build fixtures to test parts, so that when you became a test engineer, you had an understanding of what it took to test parts for the development engineers who were designing the parts. So that was the natural career progression. You started in the test lab building fixtures, designing and building fixtures. Then you moved up into an actual test engineering position, and then you moved upstairs. That was the big move, upstairs into a development engineering position.
Okay.
That was the natural progression, and it was considered, once you became a development engineer, boy, you had it made then. And a lot of guys retired from that position. Well, that was back when engineers could drive company cars as a 7th level. And so when you became a development engineer, you usually became a 7th level engineer. So you got a company car, and that was the big carrot. Well, some of the things I remember about working in the lab from a female perspective is there were no bathrooms. They never had women engineers before. I mean, there had only been 3 or 4 others, so we had to walk all the way up to the 3rd floor of building 64, I guess, to go to the bathroom. And that was where reliability engineering was, I believe. So there was a women's bathroom at the elevators. And another thing you guys may be interested to know is that the women's bathrooms all have couches in them. And that was so us women, if we couldn't fulfill the strenuous tasks of our job, we could go into our lounge and lay down. So that was one of the first things I remembered, is I get there and I couldn't find the bathroom. And so I had to go 3 floors to go to the bathroom. And it became a real trial every time you wanted to go.
Were you the only gal down there, Susan, at that time that you can remember?
I think I was. There were 3 other women that hired in before me, and that was Kathy Kornblum, who's now Kathy Everhart, and Mary Leone, and Nancy Sutake.
Okay.
And they were either already moved to a test engineering position. Now, because see, I hired in at a weird time. I hired in October, and most people hire in June or July. So I hired in at a weird time. And so most people had already passed through that stage. You typically stayed as a lab person for 3 months, 3 or 4 months. Well, depending on how good you were. At the time, we were a real growing business, and women, we were under pressure. The first set of pressures from the EEO laws, in fact, that's the only reason I got hired, I'm sure, because I was a civil engineer and I was very good grades and I was a woman. So I'm sure the only reason I got hired and the reason Ron recruited me was because I was a female and I met the qualifications. But if you were a woman or a minority in that position and you were good, you got moved very quickly. I remember Marty Zash coming in sometime when I was in the lab. She has since left the company because of the negative view towards women in engineering. In fact, all of the people that I've mentioned so far, except one, have left the company for the very same reason. And the one person that's still there wishes she had left the company. That's Mary Leone. I'm sure she'd probably give you that same feeling. they really, the attitude was that they moved women and promoted women because they had to, not because it was part of, an attempt to diversify the workforce to be maybe more closer to what the customers want or whatever. There was also an attitude, I came into this job very unprepared skill-wise, because in engineering school, they don't teach you how to work with your hands. Most of the,
Excuse me,
Michigan State,
Michigan State. You
Yeah.
went.
yeah. A lot of the guys come into the business because they love cars and they've tinkered with cars all their life. It's it's changed over time. You'll find that there's a lot of guys in there right now that don't know anything about cars. They've never worked with cars. But back then, you were either a farmer and you liked working with equipment, or you were a car nut and you liked working with cars. So there wasn't a skill development program to teach engineers how to visualize mechanical things and work with their hands. And you didn't learn that in school. Didn't matter if you were a civil or a mechanical engineer, you didn't learn that. You learned book type stuff. So I came into this job and didn't have that set of skills. I didn't know a car. I mean, I knew a car, you turned the key, it went. That's about the essence of what I knew about a car. I had no clue of what a car was. And I was not taught mechanical things, how to tinker and work. Well, and my first job is building fixtures, literally building them as a technician. So I didn't have any skills to do that, as did virtually none of the women that came in, and I'm sure none of the guys, but the guys would never admit to that, even if they didn't have the skills. So it was very hard to perform your job, and it was impossible to get any training on how to do it, because the assumption was made when you came in that you already had that. So my performance evaluations reflected that time and time again, that I didn't have the necessary skills to do the job. Even though I had, I graduated engineering school with a 3.9 average, I didn't have the skills to do what General Motors considered the typical career path of an engineer. And I know a lot of other women suffered from that same thing.
Why is Susan, just back up a minute. You picked civil engineering as your training for a reason, I assume.
Well, there were a lot of personal reasons. It didn't have anything to do with wanting to be an engineer. It had to do with making money. My parents divorced when I was in college. This was back in the 70s, when divorce became a real acceptable thing for the first time in our culture. It was right after the hippie era. And my parents divorced after being married for 30 years. And I saw what happened to my mother. She lost all her income and all her support. And I just said, that is never going to happen to me. At the time, I was a music major. So I stood back and I looked at what I was doing. I was going to school to get a degree that a lot of women do. Women did not need to make money at that point in time. Well, then I watched what happened to my mother and I said, no, that will not happen. I will always have something where I can support myself. So I literally researched all the careers that men did that made money, and I selected engineering. I happened to be good in math and science, and I may have migrated that way anyway, but the catalyst that made it happen was my parents' divorce.
Why civil?
Well, society at the time was undergoing this shift where, because of one of the outputs of the 60s was that equal rights, and that included women, and equal pay, and burn the bra out in New York, and all those things. And so at the time, the highway department started a program for minorities in civil engineering. And I was searching for a major. And I went from computer science to engineering. I ended up in civil engineering anyway. And basically, they told me that they would offer me a co-op type job if I selected my major as civil engineering. Well, as a result of the divorce, I lost all my financial support to go to school. So I was sitting here, if I wanted to finish school, I had to have money. So the whole motivator was money. They offered me a tremendous job where I worked road construction in the summer, and they paid all my living expenses as well as the salary of a construction worker, and it paid for my entire education. So I hate to say it, there was no logical selection like kids do today. Kids they're all planned out. male and female. They got it all planned out, when they're going to have kids, when they're going to get married, when they're going to graduate. Well, I didn't have nearly that plan. So I ended up in civil engineering, and I did civil engineering in 2 years.
Okay.
Because I had
You
all
had all the
music.
background.
No, I had none of the background.
Oh,
I
you
was
had the
in music.
prerequisites.
No, I didn't. I
You had
did.
anything?
I did prerequisites in engineering in 2 years. Essentially, what it was is I had attained the status of being an honors college through my music. And at Michigan State, if you're an honors college, they allow you to waive your university requirements or substitute your university requirements with other things. So they allowed me to substitute all my social studies and my humanities and all those things with all my music courses. So I did nothing but engineering for 2 years, and I took like 20 credits a term and graduated. It was not fun. So I graduated in engineering, and I worked at the highway department for a year and a half. And then, because my real love was road construction, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to dynamite mountains and build tunnels. And I still regret that I didn't do that, but at the time, I wanted to stay in Lansing, and I was motivated more by emotion, which I think women are, than by logic, which I think men are. You know, I thought I was in love with a man and I wanted to stay in Lansing. And so it didn't really matter where I worked. At that time, it was just a job. You know, we women professionals did not look at our jobs, and this is speaking for me, we did not look at our jobs as careers. The first time I realized I had a career was when I was a development engineer. So that was 1981. So it was 4 years later when I even thought of it as a term career. And my whole mentality was this is a job. And like I said, I was only there for a year. So it was a job I was going to do for a year, and then I was going to split. So I didn't, the word career, I don't know where I got that, probably out of a Ms. magazine or something, but the whole society was changing at the time. Now, I know that some of the other women that were working there were from more urban areas where these ideas, you know, they were raised by professional people, and so the idea of careers, you know, had been inbred in them a lot earlier. You know, I was raised in the country, and so it, you know, career just, what's a career? You know, I mean, you go to work every day. You don't do this fancy career stuff. But anyway, now here I am, a career one. Now I am one. You know, back then I didn't even know how to spell it. But, you know, my first love was, I really did like engineering, but it was really just a means to an end. And it accomplished that. I did real well with it. So it accomplished the goal.
I got you off track.
And that's okay. Now I'm back in the lab. I remember my first supervisor was Al Ellenwood. I don't know if you've interviewed him or not. But, you know, I'm trying to remember some of the things that happened to us when we were in the lab. I know that.
What kinds of things did you have to work on? Do you remember some of the things you physically did?
Well, I can't, you know, I was trying to, it's something with carburetors. I remember that. I had some kind of carburetor test stand. Yeah, some kind of fixture where you got gasoline all over you every day. And, you know, I didn't really like that. But one of the biggest things I remember is that we couldn't wear dresses. You know, you had to wear pants. And at that time, you couldn't find women's dress pants. You know, the
slack suits didn't exist.
The infrastructure in society didn't keep pace with what women were going through in the workforce. So you couldn't find clothes to wear. You could find dresses, but in the environment that I was working in, you could never predict when you're going to have to climb down on your hands and knees and look under a car or look at a test fixture, and you couldn't wear a dress. So you literally couldn't find clothes to wear to work. And then there was a shoes problem. Now, I know you told me I was going to remember all these things. I can't believe I'm remembering them. They had a shoe policy where you couldn't wear open-toed shoes and you couldn't wear heels above a certain height. And that all made sense for safety reasons, but nobody had bothered to communicate that to the shoe manufacturers because you couldn't find nice-looking shoes to wear in the work environment unless they were tennis shoes. You had a very limited selection. Yeah. So you couldn't find anything that allowed you to feel like a woman, but still served the functionality of the job. And the male supervisors just did not understand that at all. And I'll never forget I think it was Joe Jones coming up to me with a tape measure and measuring the height of the heels of my shoes.
My Lord.
And I couldn't, I mean, I didn't know what he wanted me to do, because we had the same requirements of the men. We had to go from the lab to a management presentation on a minute's notice. And we all know that an informal prerequisite to success is your dress. And so you can't show up in tennis shoes in a management presentation. There just didn't seem to be an understanding among the men. And I can understand that because they didn't have to go through it. They didn't understand that the dress was a real problem for us, and what we would wear. And then they'd make fun of us, because we had these limitations, if we did wear a dress because I remember I did wear dresses. And I remember people making comments all the time like, wow, a dress. And it was like they made a big deal out of the fact that I would want to wear a dress. And you were always getting this kind of special attention. And I know that the guys were searching for ways to try to relate to us, but they were having a real hard time finding ways that we were comfortable with. And so it was like, you just kind of wanted to come to work every day like a guy and do your job, but you could never do that because you're like this flower there, then you were the only one of a kind. And so everybody looked at you. They'd parade by your office to see the new woman engineer, and you'd get judged on your appearance and all this stuff rather than on your work. And it was real scary. It was very intimidating. I'm sure, like I told you before we started the tape, that I'm sure that the men had the same feelings of apprehension starting a new job at a big place, and they want to be successful. But what they didn't have to go along with that was all the scaredness of being different. A man at that age and time, what you kind of want to do is just kind of meld into the background till you regroup and figure out what it is you want to do. Well, women never got that. They were always on the spotlight, always. And anything you did wrong was magnified, and anything you did right was just kind of like, oh yeah, somebody helped her. It was never attributed to what you did. And anytime you got promoted, it was always because she's a woman, or if you got a new job, it was never because you were capable. And maybe that's true. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe they were in such haste to get women moving that they were promoting women and minorities unduly. But either way, I'm sure there were some qualified, but people never gave you the benefit of the doubt that you may be qualified. It was always, every time a promotion happened, it was all this scuttlebutt. And
you would hear that.
You'd hear that. Well, if you didn't hear it about yourself, you'd hear it about everybody else. So you knew that they were talking about you. And then, just all the things like if you'd even go out to lunch with somebody, you're automatically having an affair with them. You couldn't do anything right. You couldn't be a person.
You couldn't be one of the quote guys.
No. Well, and the problem was you didn't even want to be. I mean, you wanted to be who you were, but there was no acceptance for who you were because the culture was you had to be one of the guys. And you couldn't be one of the guys because you weren't one of the guys. And you couldn't be yourself because our culture doesn't allow for diversity. We don't accept that. We punish it. And then if the diversity happens to be women, then you get into all the sexist things. So it was a very uncomfortable place to be as a young woman. And like I said to you earlier, I'd never want to have to go through that again. Those were the very, very worst years of my entire life, from 22 to 30. And a lot of it had to do with the environment of work. And you may say, well, why didn't you just leave? And I guess now I don't know it would have been different anywhere else. It certainly would have been different if you had gone out and started your own business or went out and worked in a small company. I wouldn't have had to go through near the pain. But there was always this feeling that it was your fault, that you were bringing it on, by looking pretty, like maybe you should come into work ugly every day or something. And really all you just wanted to do was fit in and make friends. But it just didn't seem like you could do anything right. If you'd go to the bars with the guys, which I was used to doing from my road construction days, and I was a good pool player, so I could fit right in. I had things in common. But then the wives would get jealous. I haven't got into the wives yet. We haven't even gotten into the wife part of it. So you couldn't socialize. Or if you did socialize, it was always like the guys were trying to hide their involvement with you,
Oh, gee.
because there was just an automatic perception that if they were friends with you, then there must be something going on. And that was a perception that was fostered by the male culture at work, as well as by the female culture outside of work, because the women on the other side of the edge, we were at the leading edge of career women. The women on the other side were feeling very inadequate. All this same women's lib conversation and everything were making the homemakers feel inadequate for being at home. So we had this division where there was very little support for the woman professional, especially a woman professional in a male environment. The men didn't support you, and they almost couldn't support you because they were going to get in trouble at home for doing that. There wasn't a male culture that supported them supporting you, and the women wanted to tear your eyes out whenever they saw you. So, I mean, you were kind of like on this island. Now, so then you say, well, why don't you bond together with the women at work? Well, I'm sure you read a lot of articles. Women just don't bond like men bond. Women like to pick at each other. So there wasn't a support network of women at work, because the way we were structured HRM wise, women were pitted against women, because we were only going to promote a few, the ones that were required to meet our EEO requirements. So it was like women were competing against women as well as competing against the broader spectrum. So it was very hard to network with the other women that you were working with.
Plus, there were so few and far between.
Yeah, that they were very few and far between. The major population of the women there were secretaries that had a whole different set of demands on them, or set of interests. We weren't all one group, and GM or Oldsmobile wanted us to all be one group. They didn't understand that all women are not created equal. Like for example, if you look at the men's club, this was the big deal back then, the girls' club.
That's going to be an interesting piece of discussion.
The men's club, it was the professional men. It wasn't hourly men. It was the men's club. It was the salary guys. Now, you could argue that women professionals and women clerical people are all one group. They're all professionals, but with the risk of getting myself in big trouble, the women clerical people to the women professionals are like the male hourly people to the male professionals, relatively speaking. Sure. So there just wasn't a place for this small nucleus of women professionals in the girls' community. First of all, we didn't think of ourselves as girls. Yeah. We didn't think of ourselves as bake sale organizers, sure, or doll dressers or coffee makers, or the support, yeah, person that a clerical role is. We didn't look at ourselves that way. We looked at ourselves as the equivalent to the professional men, which had a completely different set of club type things. So I'll never forget, Mary Leone tried to get the name of the club changed from Girls Club to Women's Club. I mean, that seems like a rather innocuous thing to do, but boy, did that create an uproar. And that really pitted the girls against the girls, because believe it or not, the clerical women, this division, and I'm just putting them in the clerical category, even though I'm sure there were more than just clerical women. They were typically from the older school, and women had a place and men had a place, and these new women were not in their place. So it became a war, and the bottom line is it never got renamed to Women's Club. That happened about 12 years later, 10 or 12 years later. I mean, it happened very recently. If you go back in history, it did not happen back when it was first proposed, which is like the second year I was here, or the third year I was here.
But you couldn't become a part of the executive club or the men's club.
No, oh no. No, we were the girls' club.
That's an interesting problem. No, even though you were just like Joe Schmuck.
Well, the difference was we were women. So we had our own place. And there was a girls' club, which was our place, even though it didn't relate to our needs.
Secretarial still know what was more about the girls' club was all about.
Yeah, when it's still that way. There really is not a place for professional women. They did rename the club Women's Club, but its primary focus is on nurturing women type things. It's not on professional issues. They still, do bake sales and fashion shows and talent shows, which are all important things. But you don't see the men's club doing those kinds of things. And they go out and play golf, that kind of stuff. Or they do community junior league activities or bigger things that require more thinking, strategic. Yeah. So it's still a problem. It's not as big of a problem, but it's still a problem. But I'll never forget the war that erupted over just trying to change a name from girls to women. And I remember, some Mary and Marty were the more progressive with women's lib attitudes than some of the rest of us. Like,
Okay.
so they were far more sensitive to the term girls than some of the rest of us, and it just didn't seem to be a big deal. But when you started seeing what girls represented to people, then it, as you grew in, it wasn't like girls meant something, it was the men that made it mean something, and men didn't understand that. Another example I can think of is all these pinup posters that we used to have. Oh, no, right out on the tool shops, the calendars, the just hanging right out on the wall. The Farrah Fawcett Majors one, you remember that one? I remember Marty, that really bothered Marty. I mean, it really bothered me too, but I figured it was just a condition of employment, that I had to put up with that kind of stuff, with not feeling good when I walked in and looked at it, but I figured I just had to deal with it. But it bothered Marty, and she didn't figure she should have to deal with it. So she went to her supervisor, who was a male, and asked him to do something about it, which is the logical thing to do. Her supervisor was Joe Jones. Yeah, and Joe handled that one like a bull in a china shop. He didn't support Marty whatsoever. It was kind of like he went to the shops and said, well, Marty wants you to take these pictures down. I think it's a stupid request, but because I'm your supervisor, I have to make it. And I'm not saying that's what he did, but the impact of what he did leads me to believe he did it that way, because immediately more posters went up.
Oh, the opposite.
And whenever Marty came over, they made sure that there was one right in front of her face. And she was chastised for even making this request. It was like a black mark on her record that she couldn't get along. The feeling was that the women had to fit the men. The men weren't going to change whatsoever to accept women's feelings. And that was very painful if, you were a woman that just was going to kind of, try to fit in and do your job, which is why I had this naive belief that's what I could do. So the posters were a big thing. Nobody liked them except the men. And quite often it's kind of like when I was on construction, it's like the men didn't want to have you there, and they weren't real shy about telling you. At least out there it was very open. When you get into the professional setting, it wasn't open. They did things like hang the posters up to try to make you cry. They did try to make you cry. And, like in the lab, when I was in the test lab, you'd walk through the places where the men were working on things, and they'd howl at you. And that was their thing to get to you. And my mother just kept saying, well, you just got to kind of ignore it. None of the men realized what kind of stress that put on you as a young woman, trying to remain, just do your job, and you can't even walk through your work area without having people make your sex known to the whole organization. And, you'd want to just go sit in the bathroom and cry. And, I know I did that a lot. I probably went in the bathroom and cried 2 days out of every 5 because of those kinds of things. And you couldn't turn to your supervisor. There was no one you could turn to.
There were no females
There was nobody to talk to even ask, am I too sensitive? You know, how do you handle this? How do you feel good about yourself as a woman when you're working in this environment where you can't wear clothes that make you feel like a woman? You can't look like a woman, because if you do, you're going to get punished for it. Or, you know, when I say punish, it's going to be drawn attention to, and not in a positive way, not in a flattering way, in a real lewd way. And if you do, you know, look like a woman, then you're going to be compared to all these posters over there. I mean, these guys literally used to say, well, do you think she has as nice a butt as Farrah Fawcett, and that kind of stuff. And that, you know, that was very difficult to feel professional and feel like a valued employee by the organization when there was absolutely no support for your feelings and the kind of stress you were under when you came to work every day. You know, I just never forget when I had to climb under a car, and I did have a dress on, but I was willing to do my job, which was to climb under a car, even though I had a dress on. And these assholes all stood there and watched.
Wait.
They're just waiting to see something. Or the better experience is when you're in the plant, you know, and you're walking up those stairs that don't have their grading. And guys stand under there and look up. I mean, so it's not like they were even polite. You know, women were trying to make the best of a bad situation, and the guys just didn't want that to happen. They made it very clear they didn't want us there, and we were intruders, and we ought to just go home and bake cookies or something. Which is an interesting sideline, because the very person that hired me, Ron Haas, about 7 or 8 years after I started working there, he was in a different job at the time. He called me into his office and asked me if I wouldn't really rather be home baking cookies, raising children. Yeah, yeah, I know. And he's one of the heads of our.
But he must have seen that problem, so to speak, the interaction problem that wasn't getting solved.
Well, he was one of the problems. He only got me because I was a number. I mean, there were several other incidents that happened with him in specific, but it kind of bothers you that he's at one of the high-level positions in our company right now. So it's still going on. You know, the people are rewarded in spite of the fact that they don't promote the support of diversity within our organization, or the support of the individual and their feelings. And that's too bad, because it does impact your ability to perform your professional task. You know, when you're coming into work every day and you want to cry when you're walking in, you can't do what you're assigned to do.
I'm surprised you really stuck it out, so to speak.
Well, yeah, that's why I told you that I was trying to think of good things to say. And if I was who I am right now, I probably wouldn't be here. I would not be at General Motors, because nobody should have to go through what we went through. And if you go back and look at statistics of how many women are hired in and how many have left in the engineering professional ranks, I think that it would support my point. You know, that the early ones they're gone. You know, they're gone other places. And this is not just GM, it's society. It's just the way it is. So after I left the lab, I'll get back to that. After I left the lab, I can't remember that was the time we were trying to develop the diesel engine, though. Yeah. I was the diesel engine build coordinator for a while. And I actually had to go up and work with these people that howled at me all the time. Because those were the main offenders, were the guys in the engine build group. Okay. And you know, I guess, you know, my mother, or being raised in the UP or something, gave me a lot of strength, because I just went up and, instead of doing Marty's approach, certainly didn't work, which was to go to the structure, you know, and ask them to do something about it. So I tried a different approach, and that was just to tackle them head on, you know, and go talk to them one at a time and get the job done. And that seemed to be the best approach. But, you know, they'd lie to you, you know, they'd give you misinformation. And I don't know if they did that to male engineers too, you know, so I don't know if I'm presenting this from a woman's point of view, but, you know, they'd figure if you were that stupid that you'd buy what they said, then you deserve to be lied to. And you wouldn't find out till you were presenting the information in a management meeting. Mm-hmm. And handy. Yeah, and then it would reflect on you. So I don't know if that's a female-male thing, or just a young engineer, experienced technician, teach them a lesson. But you know, you lump that into everything else, the howling, the pictures, the just the everything in it.
Were you able to win any of those guys over, so to speak?
Yeah, yeah.
Weren't some of those guys such that
Well, you know what I learned over time, and it's funny that Otto is the one that suggested you interview me, because he's the one I learned this with, is if they had women, children, they were very susceptible.
That's
So those were the ones you approached.
almost like a papa.
If they had, well, you just had to go ask them if this is how they wanted their daughters to be treated. You know, to look at themselves
Sure.
and how they were treating me, and could they honestly say that they wanted their daughters to be treated this way? And secondly, could they honestly say that they didn't want their daughters to have these kinds of opportunities? And if so, then why were they wasting their money sending them to college? So when you started using logic like that on them, you were able to win them over one at a time.
But it was still a one-on-one.
It was still one-on-one. The other thing you could do is try to find something in common. Now, I was very fortunate in that from other women, in that I'm from the UP, and I do a lot of outdoor activities, and I hunt. I don't hunt, but I fish, and I can relate to all of that. So when you could develop a one-on-one relationship with a person, then a lot of it abated, because then all of a sudden you were kind of their friend, you know. And then they would take on this fatherly thing.
Okay.
Then I went to the other extreme, and you know, it was like they got very protective, and it was kind of like either way you weren't treated just like a professional person, but you'd much rather have the father brother thing than the aggressive male thing.
Yeah.
But it was still tough, because you had to wade through all this shit just to get to do your job. And I can't believe that men had to do that, or if they did, we've got a problem as a company, because it's very inefficient to have to wade through that much bullshit just to get to the meat of the task. But the other thing that really helped is if you were a person that just really wanted to do your job. You know, if you were just there to do a job, and over time, that was really the best thing that won, is that you were just there to do a job. But
did your supervisor, excuse the interruption again, did your supervisors try and help you on training or anything, or tell you how to do things?
No.
Or you didn't get much help out of that side of the house?
I would say GM, just in general, has the worst possible preparation for a job that anybody. I have only worked one other place, but I can't believe that successful companies operate this way. I mean, and it's still going on today. I have a new supervisor that I just talked to yesterday, and he asked me where he could go to learn some concepts about supervising salaried employees. And
so he's had no training.
So he's had no training either, and all of a sudden he's a supervisor. And, you know, we have a lot of technical training now. We didn't have technical training then. I mean, I can think of Otto in specific. He called me in one day and he said he wanted a validation plan for the bumper system. Now I'm into a reliability and test position where I was testing bumpers. The law had just changed where we had to meet the 5-mile-an-hour bumper law with all of our bumpers. I don't know if you remember that. It was back in 78 or 79. But anyway, we had to redesign every bumper on every car we produced. This is also when the ADX was being introduced. You remember that, the Omega, and the downsizing of the Tornado? Well, we had to redesign every bumper in the entire place. And I was the test engineer, and Joe Feldposh was the development engineer, the release engineer. And Otto comes in and he said he wanted me to develop a validation plan, I think is what we'd call it now, but I don't know what it was called then. Well, I had no clue what that was.
What is it?
Yeah, what is it? And Otto couldn't believe that I didn't know what it was. But, you know, I never did get any training for how to do it or what it was, or even the product that I was supposed to produce, or the process I was supposed to follow. I mean, we had no processes, we had no standard definition of a product, and there was no criteria. So we were just kind of left up to our own devices, you know, to go talk to our peers, or go talk to our development engineer was really our trainer. And so if you didn't have a good relationship with your development engineer, you were screwed. Well, now fortunately, Joe was very open-minded, and he was a good guy. You know Joe, I'm sure. He was a good guy, and he helped me out a lot. So I was successful, in that job, but it was because of him, not because of the system. He was willing to work with me. On the other hand, Marty Zash, again, her development engineer, was very unwilling to work with her. That was Doug Buck. He had absolutely no desire to support Marty at all. And subsequently, she's left. It's very clear, it didn't work. So relative to the process of teaching you how to do your job, we didn't have any, and we still don't today, for the most part. We do not subscribe to standardized processes and standardized products. We like to have the individual approach of go figure out what it takes and get the job done. Yeah. And the people that make it to the top are the people that keep on going to the top. So yeah, the strongest survive, I guess. That's just not a great way to run a business. But we missed one step in my career there. I was the road test engineer out at Milford Proving Grounds.
Okay, so you left the lab?
I left the lab and went to the grounds. And now both of these times I indirectly reported to Otto. Otto was the big boss. He supervised the lab, and then I went out to the grounds and I reported directly to Mike Danek. And the time at the proving grounds was, I was told the reason I was going there was to learn more about cars. Because remember, I told you I didn't know shit about cars, so I needed to go out there and learn about cars. And my job was to be the liaison between all the engineers in Lansing and the cars that were running. It was a great assignment. The only problem was Mike Danek thought that I should already have this car knowledge in order to do the job. So I was stuck with this same problem where I couldn't do the job because I didn't have the knowledge to do the job, but yet the way I was supposed to get the knowledge was through the job. So it was this catch-22, and I followed Nancy Sutake. She was the road car engineer before me. And, Joy Rimpaw was the road car engineer before me. Nancy was the road car engineer before her. And it was real interesting because all three of them got the very same evaluation. All three of us got the exact same evaluation from Mike Danek. So, and Mike Dean, by this time there were two road car engineers, me and Mike Dean. And Mike Dean didn't have any more car knowledge than I did. Didn't get that same evaluation. So it seemed very male-female to me. And it did to Joy and Nancy too. That, you couldn't win. It was like they were looking for things that you did wrong. But the job was a great job. I really liked the job. I learned a lot about cars. Well, back then, that was, again, when the 80X car was in prototype phase. And so we had 80X cars running around the track. And so we were starting our downsizing campaign. The Tornado was being downsized also. So my job was to manage 50 cars, basically. And when the drivers thought there was something wrong with the car, my job was to figure out what was wrong with it, communicate to the engineer what was happening with the component in such a fashion that they could do something about it. All right. So I was the eyes and ears of the release engineer.
That's a task for a person that doesn't know anything, so to speak. That's
right. It really does require some skill, but if you worked hard, I recognize the benefit of the job. If you worked real hard, there were a lot of technicians out there that did know. So you just had to grab one of them and say, come help me figure this out. And for the most part, by this time, I had figured out that the routine was if you worked real hard and demonstrated a true desire to understand what was going on, the guys would support you. So I worked 15 hours a day, 6 days a week while I was on that job for about 9 months. And at the time, we had to drive back and forth from Lansing. So I was staying in town, little over an hour drive, 15 hours a day, hour back. Well, I haven't even touched on the social aspects of being a woman professional. That's another subject. At that time, the male people that you would date absolutely want nothing to do with this.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Because, there were only a handful of us in society that were doing this, and it was a major hassle. They had to make compromises for your 15-hour day. They had to make compromises. You couldn't go out on Friday night because you had to go to work at 6 o'clock on Saturday. And there was too much competition from women that didn't have to do that. All right, and you're still stuck in the same old thing in high school that girls are supposed to be pretty, not smart. So now you're out here being independent. You're very, very threatening to the men in society that you're trying to date. So you've got, I mean, just the whole scenario is you don't have much outside of work and you don't have much inside of work. And, and then to try to find female friends that you can relate to, to talk about these problems in Lansing, Michigan, it is non-existent. So you couldn't find women to do things with. You had a very difficult time finding men that were at 25 years old that were secure enough within themselves that would even want to be with you. And you'd go to work and they didn't want you there, and you couldn't network with the women because they saw you as competition. That's basically the life. You're out as a real loner. And that was tough. It was real tough. That's why I say I wouldn't want to do it over again. I don't know if I would do it over again. I don't think the price that you paid was worth the benefit that you got. Because really, the benefit you got is I'm an independent person right now, but so what? I mean, I'm also very alone. You can laugh about it now. But back then, women didn't have careers and have kids. So it was almost an either or. That didn't start happening until 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, I'm 37 now. 4 years ago, I was 33. And then it started becoming okay for women to have careers and kids. But by this time, you're already 33 years old and you're starting to get, too old. So, the whole social aspect of being a professional woman, especially in a man's field, in the Midwest, it was not this way on the coast, but in the Midwest and the industry we're in, it was not very easy. Anyway, the reason I brought that up is because the man that I was living with when I took the job at the proving grounds just couldn't handle me working 6 days a week. And that was the reason he broke up with me, because and we were engaged. And for me, it was a choice, my career or my job, because it was still a job at that time, my job or him. And if you remember my original motivation for doing all this, I chose the job. I was never going to let somebody make the choice the other way. But that didn't necessarily happen to the rest of the women, but they either quit to get married, or they, when they had kids, they quit. It just wasn't acceptable. That was definitely pushing the system beyond what it was capable of. So then at the proving grounds, we managed these cars, and the job was to communicate back. I remember the ADX car because I know you want to know some things about what we did, but the ADX car, you couldn't roll the windows down. We had a real problem with the window rolling down mechanism.
They physically wouldn't, or they were just hard?
They'd get stuck. They'd either get stuck up or stuck down because we had to crawl in and out of the car through the door. I do remember that. You definitely couldn't wear a dress in that job. But you'd crawl in and out of the ADX car through the door. That's the one thing I do remember about that car. But we just had, and that was when the C4 computer was being developed. And, it was a big, huge old box. Now it's down to this little box. But you literally had wires going to the inputs and the outputs. And what's his name? McEwen. Charlie? No. Well, whatever. The electronic genius that works in vehicle engineering, his last name is McEwen. He developed this thing, okay? And all it had was a bunch of input-output wires, like 100 of them. And when something would go wrong with this thing, this was like our first computer. When something would go wrong, I mean, I had to literally take out the schematic and go and analyze input-output wires to call him back and say, it's wire number 200, is doing this, this, and this. So we were doing, now I can see we were doing root of the basic of a computer back then. He was developing a computer. And so that was an interesting part of the job. And then we also were doing the 4-speed transmission back then. The 440. The automatic 4-speed transmission. Maybe I don't know if it's 3 or 4. I remember it was the 440T because these were my special projects that I was working on. And I didn't know anything about transmissions, but I
That's a
figured
complicated
it was an interesting thing to learn. So they were breaking down all the time. So Hydromatic was just right across the street.
Yeah.
That was when you had an Oldsmobile garage, a Cadillac garage, a Pontiac garage, a Buick garage. I don't even know what it is today, but that's what it was then. And Hydromatic had their own garage. So when something went wrong with the transmission, we'd call them. And I'd go over, because we had a transmission engineer, I'd go over and watch them tear it apart and call the engineer, and I learned an awful lot about transmissions then. So the overall job, that was probably my most favorite job.
Good learning
It was a tremendous learning experience. But what you weren't doing is you weren't building any networks in Lansing. So because you're 60 miles away. So now you come back a year later and you're plopped into this R&T position, which is the bumper test, and Otto tells you to develop a validation plan and go talk to your peers to figure out how to do it. Well, you don't have any peers because you didn't develop any. You know, you were sent off on this special assignment, and so now people really see you as competition, and you know there was no help. But I do remember back then we were far more socially cohesive, I think, as a company than we are now. I remember we started the first racquetball league. It still exists too in some forms. Mike Dean and I started the first racquetball league, and we were Coleman's Commandos against, I can't remember the name of the other team, but Dick Coleman was our supervisor, and so we had that's the name. And we set up a racquetball league that lasted for probably 10 years. It got far more sophisticated over time, but it was really a good forum to socialize where men and women could socialize on the same turf. And that was very successful at getting the males and the females on more of an equal footing, because I was very athletic, so I could play all these games with them and fit in. So that was one of the social things we did. I'm trying to remember some more things here now, because that was when I was test engineer, and basically I worked hand in hand with Joe Feldposh, and that was when you really wanted to get upstairs, and so now the company car becomes the goal. And that was our first cutback, though. I do remember that. That was our very first cutback. I got trapped in that. Oh, actually, it was an opportunity for me, but it was not an opportunity for most people, because they had to demote people. They had to move them backwards. And I remember the way they handled it. It was like everybody had to be in one spot at one time so they could tell you what was going to go on. I mean, the tension was just unbelievable. I think that was 79 or 80 when that happened. And the result for me was nothing. They cut back, but then they were short people upstairs, because what they did was they demoted the people that weren't performing, pushed them down, and so now they're short people to do critical jobs, and because I had a critical skill, I got moved upstairs. So the end result for me and several others was that it was good on paper. From a social perspective, it was absolutely terrible, because it was perceived that you were a woman, so they moved this person down so they could move you up. And that may be true. I mean, I can't argue whether that's true or whether it's not true. I was the result. You know, I didn't have anything to do with it. But, you know, that was what all the guys were running around griping about, and they still do that today. Everybody gripes about everything. But one of the things, you know, I forgot about that I have to mention when I was at the Proving Grounds is we were one of the key participants in a lot of the test drives. We used to have test drives all over the country to test components. And if they were your special component that you were working on out at the Proving Grounds, then you typically went on the rides. Well, Mike Dean went on all the rides, not me. And I asked Mike Danick that one time why I couldn't go on a test ride. Well, we had an unwritten policy back then that women couldn't go on test trips. Yeah. No, we couldn't.
What was the reason?
Because the wives.
Back to the wife problem.
We're back to the wife problem again. That was the exact reason I was told by Mike, that it was an unwritten policy that women would not go on test trips because of the potential of the misconduct of the men. It wasn't the misconduct of the women, the misconduct of the men. And I remember Mary Leone was the first woman to go on a test trip. And I think it was because of her job. It was kind of like the Army, you know, they got so many women in combat positions now that they really can't say women can't do combat. So you get to a position where you're the only woman that can do the job, then they're forced. So that's how the policy got changed. They had no other person to send, so they had to send a woman. But that really bothered me. So now it's like you can't even do the same. You get to a ceiling where you couldn't even do the same tasks as the men to get the same experiences. So that was a problem. I remember that. So then somehow that policy got changed, and I got to go on my first test trip, and it really wasn't all that great. Well, because then all of a sudden you got to socialize with these jerks that don't want you around. So now you're surrounded by them 24 hours a day. At least in the work environment, you can get away from them. You can go home. But on these test trip type things, it's like, what do you wear? What do you do? What do you say? Because if you did one slip up, it was going to be your fault. If you went to the bar and you drank too much, you drank too little, if you didn't go to the bar, there were no norms for women. There were no norms. We were the first ones. We established our own dress codes. We established our own ethical behavior. We established everything because there were no people in front of us to do that. I mean, there was nobody you could call up and say, well, what do you wear? What kind of clothes should you take?
You didn't get any lectures from anybody.
No, well, there were. Yeah, we got a lot of lectures of what not to do. Yeah.
We did get that.
Yeah, we got a lot of lectures of what not to do. Now, what pissed me off was that none of the guys got lectures of what not to do as the women. Yeah. What is the appropriate professional behavior for a woman on a test trip? That was the conversation I got. And I'm like, what's the appropriate behavior for a man? That's the question I asked. And by this time I was becoming a more militant because I was fed up with, my patience had run out. But so I went on my first test trip and trying to remember where we went. We went to Chicago. And that was with Floyd Sullivan. I remember that's when I told him I'd only hired in for a year. And he said, you better not tell anybody else that.
Of Susan E. Mohr of 6407 West Reynolds in Haslett, Michigan. The recording was made on June 9, 1992 by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River. This is tape number 2 of 3 tapes.
But, basically what they did, how they got around this whole test trip woman-wife problem is they channeled women into positions where they didn't have to deal with those issues. They, like Mary Leone, for example, wanted to be a transmission engineer. That's what she wanted to do. She wasn't the managerial type like I was. She wanted to do transmission engineering. Well, to do transmission engineering, you have to travel a lot with your cars and evaluate transmissions. Well, I don't know how long she's been there, probably 3 years longer than me, but we might want to ask her because I think she didn't become a transmission engineer till like 8 or 9 years ago. So halfway through, I mean, they wouldn't put women in powertrain, period. She was the first woman in powertrain because powertrain was the male bastion of cars. It went powertrain, chassis, body.
So the ladies got in the body side of the house?
Oh, yeah. Every woman you talk to, the women are in the body side.
Why?
Well, because we were good at that, quote and unquote, because it was colors and it was textures. Back to the perception of females. It had nothing to do with your technical capability. It was what we were perceived to be good at. Now, in my case, it was a good fit because I went upstairs and I did the 82A car, which was the Cutlass, Sierra? I did that and I had bumpers and sheet metal at the time, which that was fine. But then after that, I did the GM20 instrument panel, and that's where we ran into each other. But that happened to be that is my forte. The lighter side of engineering is what I like better. I've discovered over time, it's interesting how you kind of migrate to what you're good at, but I've discovered over time that what I am really good at is program management, which when you design an IP, you do more program management than you do anything else because there's so many parts. So that's where I am now. I'm in program management. But so fortunately, the male system worked for me,
Yeah.
but it didn't work for 2/3 of the other women. I mean, Mary Leone is a good example. She wanted to do powertrain engineering. Mary Muncasey, this is a person I didn't mention to you. She works for Oldsmobile, but she was a tremendous example. She came to us from Detroit Diesel Allison. Is that the name of it back then? Diesel, anyway. She was a senior project engineer for Detroit Diesel. And she had like 2 or 3 years experience. And we brought her in and put her in body test engineering, which is the equivalent of a demotion. And in the scale of male things, it's at the bottom. I mean, her experience for like 5 or 6 years was in diesel engines. Worked on diesel engines. Well, that's why she went to Oldsmobile when the split happened between LAD and Oldsmobile, because she's like, she couldn't work in her strength. So she may as well go way outside her strength and work in marketing. So women had a real easy time getting in the body group, and every woman you talk to, or they start in the body group and then they move. The next easiest position was the chassis group, and then impossible was powertrain. And emissions within powertrain was the most impossible, because that was probably the highest technical. The higher the technical, the higher the importance in the organization, the less exposure women got to it.
So people perceive that these more difficult or technical things the ladies couldn't do?
Yeah. Well, if you look at who's in there, and I think that I will call it discrimination, because I do believe it was discrimination. I think the discrimination was probably applied to some men too. If you weren't a car jack, if you didn't go out and work on race cars in your spare time, you had a much more difficult, or hang out with those people, you had a much more difficult time becoming a powertrain engineer. Because yet, there was just this male bonding thing, of cars, which was, like I said, again, it was fine with me because I didn't want anything to do with it. I liked the pretty stuff. So that was not a problem. But there was definitely, whether it was conscious or unconscious, there was a systemic discrimination about giving women the experiences they needed to move ahead. Now, you got to look at all this, too, from the standpoint that, this is how we operate as a division. And all I'm talking about is product engineering.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Back then, we never contemplated cross-pollinating people. So the entire career path I'm talking about and the struggles to get ahead have absolutely nothing to do with what it takes to really get ahead in the corporation. It was unheard of to move people from product engineering to materials management, or to manufacturing engineering, or to anything. The career path to the top was through product engineering. And that culture still exists. When I went on a fellowship for 2 years, when I came back, I told them the last thing I want to do is go to product engineering, because it was clear to me through my MBA program that you may get to the top, but you weren't going to have the skills to do the job. And I've been there millions of times, so I'm going to go out and do it my own way. And I'm going to make my own career path. And I'll never forget John Cahoon. He was my advisor, telling me, well, you got to settle in on one career path. I said, I have. I'm going to keep moving sideways until you guys recognize the value of doing that, and then you'll move me up. And then I'll keep moving sideways, and then you'll move me up. Because you're going to realize sooner or later that a good manager, and that's exactly what they are, is they're good managers. They're not technical experts. I want to be a technical expert at managing a business, not at designing a product. And the only way I'm going to do that is to go sideways. And if I don't achieve what I want to do at GM, I'll just go somewhere where they do value the background of having multiple staffs worth of experience. Well, now they're transitioning more towards that.
What did John say about that?
He said, well, you just don't understand the political workings of this company. And I said, well, you're probably right. I said, and I'm also not a 30-year employee, like most people are. The culture is changing, and we're also at the leading edge of that. The same women you're talking to are at the leading edge of the cultural change in employees. Yeah. So, everybody that's behind us have much less affiliation with the corporation as a whole. They don't have the same work ethic that the older people did. So you're not only seeing a break, you know, from the first women to be hired, but you're also seeing a break in a social work culture that you're just reading about now, you know, where we won't give up, you know, our personal life to have a professional life and that kind of stuff. Which now is, you know, this whole thing of, you know, the social things of women professionals is now it's all turned around into a benefit. You know, when I say I wouldn't do it over again, I don't want to, but to get the result, it's great. Because when you look at where you end up at as a woman, if you meet a man that is in the same category that you are, you automatically double your income and you could retire. Right. You know, then work becomes an option for both of you, you know, if you've managed your money wisely. So now I'm finding myself at age 35 or 37 with, well, this is an interesting position to be in. You know, now you come to work because you want to come to work, not because you have to come to work. And the corporate culture doesn't recognize that kind of attitude at all. So, well, where did I leave off at? I was back in R&T, and I got moved up because somebody got demoted, and I got moved up. And, you know, you ask about was there training to do the job? I mean, that had to be one of the worst years of my life, was learning how to be a release engineer, because we had absolutely no processes. We had no documentation of anything, like how to order an experimental part, or, you know, and you were like, no, well, it wasn't then. It may be now. I'm not sure, but it wasn't then. I mean, you could not go to a book and say, okay, experimental part, this is how I do it. You know, release, an engineering release, you know, this is what this means. You know, like I'll never forget impact to timing or something like that, or impact to cost. I mean, it's like, well, how the hell do I know? You know, and I don't even know how to figure out what the impact to the cost is. But it's like the development engineer was the center of the world, and it still is. But you weren't given any of the understanding. You know, you had to build your network over time, you know, to how to get this information. And you always had people calling you up from everywhere because you were supposed to know everything. Yeah. Like, I mean, I can't remember why you and I worked together, but I'm sure you called me at some point in time and wanted to know something. I'm like, shit, I don't know, you know. So for about the first year on the job, as you're going through that first cycle, everything that comes across your desk, you got to go find out informally what it means, how to do it. So whenever you do that, you know there's a lot of variation. I mean, if you just stand back and look at it from a synchronous perspective, because if you're going formally getting definitions, they can't be standard. And there's no defined process. You're not getting good answers to questions because you're not involving the experts that know the answers. You know, you're dealing with it yourself. So there was absolutely no training in that job whatsoever. But I'll never forget, I got the job in November, and this is the 82A car, and the typical career path was an experienced engineer would take the project just about to pilot, before pilot, and then a rookie, you know, this was your training, the rookie would come in and bring it from pilot to start a production. So I inherited it from Doug Stott. He works in Oldsmobile now. And that was, I mean, I didn't know shit about what I was doing. I remember going, that was when we had GMAD, and they were the building arm of all of our products. And I went to a GMAD meeting, and they said we were going to have net build.
Whatever that is.
Whatever that is. We're going to have net build. And I asked them what that meant. And they told me that what it meant was we were going to have zero tolerance. Okay, so we went back, and you're an old manufacturing person. We took all of our tolerances off of our front end panel. Well, it didn't get them excited until they tried to build it. Well, that was still a problem until 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, they were still calling me up trying to understand why we did this. What is it that we did? Because we got to a point where we had to put 13 shims in to attach the front end panel to fit it to the whatever that header is called out there. And so that was a big mistake that I made, because we just didn't have good communication processes at all. I mean, I didn't know what it was. They told me what net build meant. I believed them. Their definition. I believed them, and I went back and did what they told me to do. It's like, okay, I guess, you think of it in retrospect, you probably should have asked somebody, but, we didn't We were moving so fast
Sure.
then because we were expanding. We were
A lot more
an
car
expanding
lines.
company,
Yeah.
a lot more car lines, a lot different car lines. So you couldn't talk to anybody. So then the following August, we had start of production. This was my first start of production, first time ever. They made a decision down in Doraville. I spent a month down in Doraville, and they made a decision that they weren't going to let one car out of the body shop until it met all their requirements, whatever
Okay.
those were.
All the specs.
All the specs. Well, everything that happens with front end sheet metal and
Oh,
bumpers happens in the body shop.
Spades.
Well, the top 50 problems, of the top 50, I was perceived to own the top 45.
Oh, you had them all.
Well, Fisher Body shared them with me, but because I was the ultimate customer,
Sure.
even though I only had the sheet metal, I didn't have any of the stuff underneath it.
Yeah.
Plant 3 made the parts. Fisher Body designed them, Plant 3 made them, and because Plant 3 was Oldsmobile,
Right.
I owned them. They dumped it back on me because we didn't have a Plant 3 rep there. I mean, I'm what, 1981, so I'm what, 27 years old, and I have to get up in this war room. You've been through those things before, and I'm the only woman there, and I'm the first. Was I the first woman development engineer? No, Lori Shuchuk was. I was the second woman development engineer, the first woman to be on any male thing, like sheet metal and stampings. Lori did wiring. Wiring was okay because nobody wanted anything to do with wiring. They didn't understand that it was a new technology. So women were okay if they were in new technologies or women's things like IPs. There's something nobody else wanted to do. But sheet metal, that's hardcore men. That's in big presses, that's manufacturing, that's the whole ball of wax. Well, I had to get in front of this war room thing and make these presentations every day, and it was like, you have absolutely nobody to talk to at that point in time about the politics of the situation. And
are they paying attention to you? Are they listening?
Hell no.
Are they just
not at all
drinking their coffee and talking and all the crap they do?
Well, they're yelling.
So
You still got the male environment then. They're swearing and yelling and scratching themselves and doing all those things that they would never think of doing today because the culture doesn't allow it. And I remember I'd go back and I'd just cry. It's like, why do I have to be in this? I've paid all my dues. Granted, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm the first one to admit that, but I want to work hard. Why can't somebody just help you, and show you how to do this? Now, I'm not saying that there would have been another woman there that they would have helped you. Probably to the contrary, they wouldn't have helped you at all because the women to women had a big problem and still do. But I think this was more of a young engineer, green grass person. But on top of that, just the emotions that went along with being the only woman there and owning 45 of the top 50 problems and not having a clue as to what the political culture was like or who to contact. And well, Gene Klotz saved me. I don't know if you remember Gene Klotz. Yeah, I called him on the phone. Didn't even know the guy. I called him on the phone and I said, you got to come down here and help me because I don't have a clue. I just do not have a clue as to what I'm supposed to do. And I think that a lot of these problems are yours. Well, so he chartered a plane and flew down there. And we spent about 48 hours in the plant and got a handle on everything that was wrong. But I'll never forget how we did business. And, you talk about how the Japanese do business now and just how screwed up we were, like banging on fenders to get them into place. And
2x4s.
Yeah, it's just, that was my first plant experience, my first startup. And
I'd never been out in the shop.
Not really. I'd been there making parts and stuff, but not to any extent. So Mike Camp was the body shop manager. We talk about a small world. He was the body shop manager. So, Gene came down and we fixed a lot of the problems. And you talk about our processes and how we did things. The main problem was Fisher Body would design something and they'd put tolerances into it. Then we'd take it in Plant 3 and add to the tolerances to accommodate for the spring back of the metal. But then we'd add more. So you get there and you got tolerance on top of tolerance on top of tolerance. Well, it doesn't fit. So anyway, it took us, we're 3 weeks into the startup and haven't built a car. Meanwhile, all the male engineers that are downstream from the body shop, they're all down there fixing their parts. Because there's no cars there, so they're not on any of this top list. But by that time I was getting a lot of support from different men. But you learn the skill over time of how to spot the men that are receptive to helping you and the men that aren't. And I'm sure that by this time it's more equaled out to how a male young engineer would do that too, because not every person is willing to help a male engineer either. But it was just tough because you're the only woman there and you don't fit into the male thing.
Could you find a mentor like many new young engineers can find?
Well, a mentor found me.
Mother hen, so to speak.
A mentor found me. And that was on my first test trip, and that was Ted Lucas.
Oh, okay.
You remember Ted Lucas?
Sure, we'll see him next week.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, say hi to him for me. He found me on the first test trip and kind of took me under his wing, and that completely backfired.
Oh, did it?
Oh, well,
that's interesting.
Yeah, well, how it backfired was, you're back to that. If you can go out to lunch with a person, you're having an affair with them.
Right.
So I lost complete credibility because I was, quote, having an affair with the chief engineer. So then every promotion I got, every opportunity I got, became
the opposite problem.
Yeah. So yeah, Ted did a lot of things to help me. He also did a lot of things to hurt me. Not knowing. Not knowing. So I don't believe that his intention was ever to hurt me. I believe his intention was always to help me. But it ended up backfiring. And I'm still living that down to this day. Oh yeah, I had one guy come to work for me here 3 months ago. And this is 3 months ago, right? And this all happened back in 1981. So this is 11 years later. And my best friend happens to belong to a club that this guy is part of. And this guy that came to work for me didn't know that this was my best friend. Okay? And so my friend was talking about how I was going to General Motors, and he said, well, I just got a new job and I'm working for a woman. This is an older guy. And my friend says, oh, well, how do you feel about that? Well, it turns out the older woman is me. The woman is me. And Mike says, well, I don't think I have a concern working for a woman, but I know how she got the job. And started to tell him the story of how I got the job. Okay, now this is 11 years later, a master's degree from Harvard, and several promotions. Yeah, it's like, what does it take to put this shit behind you? And there's nothing to put behind me. That's the point. It was just strictly, if I had been a young male engineer and had the same offer from an assistant chief engineer, hell, you would have eaten it up. Oh, you betcha. You would have done whatever it took. Yeah, you'd have done whatever it took. And I don't want to say I did whatever it took because that could be interpreted the wrong way, because I didn't. But I basically followed his directions. I did whatever he suggested. I did whatever it took in a male sense of a word, not in the male-female sense of the word. And because of that, and I went out to lunch with him, and I socialized with him. And because of that, I got this whole rumor thing going on that is still haunting me today. I started crying when my friend Chuck told me that about what Mike, I just started crying. It's like, I should just go look for a new job. This is bullshit, that I'm still fighting something that was never true in the first place, but people are questioning my credibility because of something that never existed. But it obviously is division wide, because he didn't even work in vehicle engineering. How would he have known that? So that was kind of disappointing. But so you asked, did somebody mentor you? And that was a direct case of somebody mentoring me. In other cases, there were a lot of indirect cases. Like Otto was very, very, very supportive of me. I always felt like I could go in and talk to him or ask him any questions. But again, I pegged him right away because he had a daughter that was my age.
Father.
So it was more of a father relationship. Denny Condon was very helpful to me. You'd meet people in the plants. You know, you would meet people all over, but it was more of a one-on-one thing. But it always started rumors. It always. You know, I mean, I made a couple friends with peers that, I mean, Mike Dean and I got very close when we worked 15 hours a day together, just like anybody would. And, I mean, everybody just assumed that we were dating. You know, it was like you couldn't have a peer relationship with the men without getting into this stuff. And the stuff would always get in your way because it was work stuff. So you just couldn't operate the way the men operated. It seemed to be a lot different for the women that went to GMI.
That's an interesting observation.
It appeared to be a lot
Lori
different,
Shuchuk.
like Lori Shuchuk.
Okay.
And my philosophy was always because they had developed a camaraderie outside of work, you know, like the drinking and the partying that goes along with going to college. They were buddies. They became buddies. So they had a core of buddies that they could turn to. And then they built from there.
Perception of people that the GMI task is different than the Michigan State task.
It very well could be this, you know, because the GMI just in general has a,
after time at work, it's
yeah,
quote the guys do.
it could be the way that they're brought into the company. But I just an observation that it seemed to be a lot easier for women that came out of GMI than for women that came out of other places. So yeah, the mentors were there and the mentor system backfired, but I'm sure it was because of Ted that I was put on the GM20 because I wasn't considered a raving success on whatever the 82A car or whatever it was because I was.
So you got through your 50 problem.
Yeah, well, we got through that somehow and it got in the startup, and then it was shortly after that that I got the GM20 assignment. And by this time, you know, I was more accepted as being technically knowledgeable. But then we got into a whole nother set of issues where Byron and I were talking about this the other day, and I had forgotten all about this, but there was a company car scenario where, you know, the company cars were just, I mean, people were hungry for company cars. Now, see, I was still a 6th level while I was being a release engineer, and most release engineers were 7th levels. But they had made this dumb rule because of the resource constraints that you couldn't get promoted unless you changed jobs and it was a more significant job, or your workload increased, or well, I can't remember the third criteria. But anyway, I was in the GM20 program, and you remember how hectic that was. I mean, they couldn't change my job because I was too important. They couldn't increase my workload because we were already working 60 hours a week. And I can't remember the third criteria. But anyway, I was a 6th level, and they couldn't promote me to a 7th level because we had these dumb rules. And on top of that, but I was expected to do all the tasks of a 7th level person. And the 7th level employees, who were all men, all had company cars, you know, so they could run out to building 90 whenever they needed to. They could go to 150. They could go to suppliers. They could do a lot of things. So Bill Beach was my supervisor at the time, and he authorized me to drive a company car and gave me a blanket pink slip. Okay, so this is the lack of process definition. We're back to that again. So I had this pink slip. Well, I didn't know what to do with it. You know, if I got a car from the garage, I knew I had to take the pink slip to the garage to get the car. But if I already had the car, I figured, well, I just have to keep the pink slip in the car so that I'm authorized. All right. Well, about 3 months later, the Friday before Memorial Day weekend, Otto calls me into his office and asks me if I'd been driving a company car without authorization. I said, no. I said, I haven't. I said, I have authorization, but I have been driving a company car. And he says, well, did you or did you not do this? You know, drive somewhere. And I said, yeah, I did that. And he says, did you or did you not have a pink slip? I said, yeah, I have a pink slip. And he says, well, is it in the Larry Osborne's book in the garage? I said, no, it's in the glove compartment of the car. He says, well, what's it doing there? I says, well, because that's where I put it. You know, I said, I didn't know I had to take. He says, well, how'd you get the car? And I told him how I got the car. Well, it turns out that somebody had written this anonymous letter
Oh, no.
and sent it to my mentor. Yeah. In addition to posting it on all the bulletin boards. Yeah, mentioning my name and implicating him. Okay. About this misuse of company cars and that I got special privileges with innuendo. Right. So Otto said, well, is all this true? And I said, no, it's not true. I said, this is what happened. I have the car. Bill gave me the car to do the job. You know, he gave me a pink slip. Nobody told me the pink slip had to be in the book. Okay, I mean, he says, well, the fact that you didn't know the rules doesn't absolve you of responsibility to follow them. And I remember him saying that. I'm like, whoa, you know, who has responsibility to tell me the rules, you know, or what the process is? But I'd say that we still operate that today. We don't have defined processes. We don't have clear communication of what the processes are. So people still do the same sort of thing. But the fact that this letter even got issued, that was a real sore spot, and that followed me around for a long, long, long time. It was bad. So that was the company car issue. And so then I finally how did I get promoted? Oh, I got promoted. Ted was in the hospital with his heart attack. I remember that. And I got promoted to chassis group. That was a real promotion. Yeah, I moved out of the women's thing and into the chassis thing. And I was a steering engineer. And I thought, well, this is great. Now I'm in chassis group. That must mean that I'm being more recognized. Ted wasn't here, so nobody can accuse him of, you know, being involved in this promotion. So maybe now I'm finally getting accepted. Well, and that was true. You know, but right then is when it was 1984 or 83 when the announcement came out that we were going to split up, and I had C-car steering. So all my job consisted of was transferring Orange Book. Remember Orange Book responsibility? We had Orange Book responsibility for steering, and all my job consisted of was transferring drawings to CH, to Flint. So that kind of shattered those hopes, but I didn't really let that bother me because I figured that, well, I still made it though, you know. Yeah. And then that was when I said, well, it's time to execute phase 1 of my 10-year plan, and I decided to apply for a fellowship. Well, and this is one of the aspects where being a woman can be to your advantage. When, you know, you're applying for special things, so you are a minority, and as such, you know, there's advantages in the selection process. So I ended up getting a fellowship to go to Harvard, and I spent from 85 to 87 getting my MBA at Harvard. But when I was getting ready to come back, it was like that was the first time I really decompressed from all the shit that had been going on for the last 8 years. And I was getting ready to come back, and it was like, I didn't want to come back. It was like I saw this big black cloud over Lansing, and I didn't want to come back and face all these issues, you know, all this stuff with my supposed relationship with an assistant chief engineer who was now chief engineer of Oldsmobile. This company car thing, yeah, but location. I mean, this is a family affair here, you know that. I just didn't want to deal with all that stuff. You know, I had effectively separated myself from GM while I was out there, and I guess I really had to think before I came back. I didn't want to come back. And Tom Davis became chief engineer at that point in time. And I came back for the first summer, and I went back into product engineering, and it was so stifling after having been in such a free environment as Harvard Business School. And I was so aware of how shitty our business practices were after having been to an enlightened view like that. It was like, that was the first time I realized there was just no way I could come back to vehicle engineering. It just couldn't happen because, first of all, they would never accept me for being anything different than what I was when I left. And I'd just spent 2 hard years becoming different. And professionally, it wasn't any real advantage to coming back. And I'll never forget, when I went away on the fellowship, Ron Haas made it very clear to me, he was chief engineer at the time, he made it very clear that I would not get a promotion when I returned.
Oh, they were just coming back.
I was just coming back. And I asked him, I said, well, why are you investing in all this time and money if, you're not considering me for some kind of management position? He said, well, he says, because you're a girl. And I can't stop it. You're a minority. So I got it. And I was like, that's when I said to him, I says, well, I said, that'll be the first advantage that's happened to me in this organization because I'm a girl. So I guess I should take it, because the bare minimum, I end up with a Harvard MBA. And a promotion in General Motors doesn't mean shit compared to that. That's what it was. Yeah. I know that. A couple of funny looks on his face. Well, you just get to the point where I was fed up with, just the whole treatment. But, I do have to back up because, on this mentor thing, getting the fellowship required a lot of work. And Al Canton, I don't know if you knew Al Canton, but Al was very, very, very supportive of me. He is a black male. Black person. And he just bent over backwards helping me get this fellowship, as did Tom Rasmussen. And the two of them are really responsible for getting me to where I am right now. So you'd have to call that a mentor. Tom and Al were both my supervisors at the time in the chassis group. And, they went to bat for me over and over and over again. Yeah. And they were probably my first two supervisors that really treated me like, besides Otto, that, like just an equal employee. Like an engineer. So, and they had a large role, I think, in getting me the fellowship support from Ron and from the Oldsmobile division. So I did go out to Harvard, and when I came back between my first and second year out there, I'll never forget, Dick Manwaring was the administrative assistant chief or something at the time. And we joke about this now because, my last day on the job here, I went in to talk to him, and he says, well, we should talk about your reentry position. And I was all ready for this. I had done my homework, and he says, we want to offer you a position as a 7th level supervisor in training position in R&T. And I just looked at him and I said, that's not acceptable. That's not a job that I'm willing to accept. And I'd already done my homework to find out that if you couldn't come to a mutual agreement between your sponsoring location and yourself, they had to sign a piece of paper saying that, you're at loggerheads, and that made you free to do whatever you want to within the corporation. And so I said to Dick, I said, well, Dick, is this your final offer? And he said, yeah. And I says, well, it's my final response. So here's the paper. Will you sign it? And he says, well, I can't sign this. I said, why not? You just said this is your final offer. I said, I don't accept it. We're not in agreement. So I would just as soon be able to start looking for another position right now somewhere else in the corporation, because I'm sure that there's somebody else. So this is where I really used the women thing to my advantage, because I knew there was somebody that would take my 8 years of experience as an engineer, 2 years of Harvard, and put me in a management position, because that's what I wanted. But they just couldn't see their way clear, and I really believe this was systemic discrimination. I would have been the first woman in a management position here, technical. They couldn't see their way clear to do that. And that was about the time Tom Davis came in. I think it was September. That was in August, and in September he came in, and I was still pushing to get this paper signed, and I was already interviewing. I went down to financial staff and marketing and product. Yeah, I'm back at school, and I'd already started interviewing without the paper. So this was coming back to him. Yeah, I mean, it's like, you won't sign it? Okay, I'll just ignore the fact you haven't signed it, and if someone really wants me, they'll get you to sign it. Otherwise, I told him, I'll either not come back or I'll go work for somebody else in the corporation. And Tom Davis came in, and Tom Davis was enlightened enough to recognize the situation and do something about it. So him and John Cahoon flew out to see me in November and offered me 2 different positions to select from, both of which were in management and both of which were in different staffs. Because I told him that was my only requirement, is I didn't want to be in vehicle engineering, and I wanted an 8th level position. Well, so then I think Lori was the first 8th level and I was the second 8th level. And so she was the first manager, I was the second manager. But I mean, that is just sad when you look at all the women that have been there were women before me, and there are women with me, and there are women after me, and there are only 2 women technical managers. You got to stand back and look at our process. They can argue that we don't have enough experience, that we don't have enough training, but they're responsible for all that. The organization is. I mean, it's not our job to go out and get training. You know, I've done it. So training is an excuse, because I mean, hell, we don't train anybody to do anything around here. So, and they're doing it again. You know, now they're trying to get women in manufacturing, so they're trying to have a career pathing discussion with me where they've told me that I have to have manufacturing experience to be promoted. And I just said, show me that, where that's a writing and policy and all the unclassifieds that meet those requirements, which they don't, and they're all men. And I said, forget it. Forget it. I'm real happy. You know, I've matured now to the point where I am not going to sacrifice the rest of my life to keep moving like I sacrificed the first part of my life. It won't happen. And that's really a sad statement for the company, because I'm sure there's a lot of other women that don't even get to this level that, you know, they either quit, they leave. I mean, there's articles about it all the time, but I know what I want to do, and I know what I'm good at, and I'm not going to play the male game anymore. It's just too bad. I'll keep doing what I'm doing forever, or I'll go somewhere else. You know, I'll go fish for a living or something. You know, I'm starting right now. I sacrificed too much to get to this point. Yeah. But
you haven't told me about what you are doing now.
Well, I haven't got past Harvard, you know, so I graduated from Harvard. And that was Harvard was a real disappointment, because I thought I was going to go to Harvard and I was going to be surrounded by women professionals. You know, remember I told you about how in society it was hard to find friends, it was hard to find women to hang out with, it was hard to find women you had something in common with. And the surprising thing was that there's like a band of women that are my age, plus maybe 5 years, minus maybe 2, that understand what it took to get to where we are and what the hardships were.
Because they went through it.
Because they went through it. Yeah. But it's not very much younger than me. That's why I say it's minus 2. Yeah. It's not very much younger than me, where they just take it for granted. They don't understand that they're just not equal. And I can see it. The systemic problem is still there. But these girls that I went to school with, because the average age was 26, so I was old. I was 30. So that's 4 years younger than me. They just take it for granted. When you ask them the same question about did they see any discrimination or any harassment or any of that kind of stuff, it's like they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, what's that? And it's happening all around them. All that's happened is that the guys have just gotten smarter about doing it. You know, the system is more subtle, so you don't pick up on it. And so that was real disappointing, because I went to school.
All these people at Harvard that you're working with are
the bulk of them. Yeah, there were a handful of people that you could relate to. So it was disappointing. I went to this professional school thinking, I'm finally going to find friends and I'm finally going to find my niche. Yeah. And you still didn't, because it's this narrow band. I call it the snowplow. Yeah. And we're still at this wave. As long as we stay at the forefront, and I'm kind of falling behind because there's women getting promoted around me. But as long as we stay at the forefront, we're going to continue to be the wave. And so that was a little disappointing out at Harvard, that I didn't accomplish the social networking that I thought I was going to accomplish. But then I came back and I accepted one of the positions that Tom and John offered me, and that was in the materials management staff, working on supplier development and certification. And I managed 14 men. And I mean, you talk about having no training to supervise. No, none. If I did, it didn't add value. You know, it's kind of like, here, we'll put you on the job and you figure out what it is you need to know, and then we'll go figure out how to tell you what it is you need to know. And that was not fun. but I made a whole lot of adjustments simultaneously. You know, I bought a new house. I had to move back from Boston, and so there was just a lot of changes. But it was not easy. And then you got into the situation of managing men that were older than you in an area where you had virtually no technical expertise.
And all that.
And it's all men, no ladies. And that was very tough. I don't want to say that they didn't want to accept you, but some of them really didn't. They didn't even want to acknowledge that you were their boss. So it really reminded me of the road construction days where you had to prove yourself. All over again. You had to prove yourself. And I still do. Whenever I take over a new work group, the first thing I do is meet with all the employees and tell them what my qualifications are for doing the job. Yeah. I've just decided you can just hit it head on. Because I just got a new job in April. And my first meeting, it was clear to me that these guys had absolutely no confidence. Because I don't know shit about the subject matter. So I just walked in and I said, well, in case you're wondering if I know anything, the answer is no. I don't know anything about what it is you're doing technically. And when I'm finished with this job, I don't really have grand expectations of knowing anything technically about what you do. That's your job. Because I shouldn't have to. If you do your job, I shouldn't have to know technically what you do. My job is to manage the activities surrounding what you do, to remove the roadblocks. But we don't manage that way at General Motors. We expect our managers to be technical experts. That's why we're so inefficient, because there isn't one person alive that can be a technical expert on every aspect of managing a business. So consequently, we get very narrow in our approaches to managing the business because it's all the guy can hold in his head at the time. You can't do the whole scope. So instead of being a true manager, we got technical experts, and so we only manage little segments. We don't manage the whole scope. But people have told me that I have a completely different approach to managing, and Lori and I have talked about it than a man would. And it starts with day one, where you really have to walk in and say, here are my credentials for being your supervisor. And this is it. But well, I'm trying it this time, and it seems to have worked a lot better, where
Works still not?
yeah, this is my skill. This is where I add value to your job. This is where you add value to me. But the interesting part of all this is the woman-to-woman problem, okay? Because my second job, which was a purchasing agent, I did the supplier development activity for a year, where I had to travel a lot. So now, you're gaining more confidence. And the interesting part is, as you gain confidence as a woman and you gain confidence as a professional employee, it's like all of a sudden it just became easier. It just kind of gradually transitioned to that, where you could wear anything you wanted to. You didn't have to dress like a man. You didn't have to act like a man. Now all of a sudden you could wear dresses. You could curl your hair. You could wear makeup. You could be yourself. And I just got to this point about 3 years ago. And that's sad, when you sit back and think about that, you're really trying to be somebody else in order to succeed for 10 years. That's why I say it won't happen again. I'll either succeed being who I am, which is what the guys do, or you won't succeed at all. But I would harbor a guess that you're not going to succeed as a woman not being a guy. So the first women that I had to supervise was as a purchasing agent. And quite frankly, I had absolutely no problems at all. They gave me a secretary who was absolutely impossible to work with and was considered hopeless in the department. They didn't give me the stars. All right, that's another thing too, is they don't, this whole systemic thing perpetuates itself into management. They don't give you for the golden people, they give them things that work. For the non-golden people, they give you the things that you got to fix. So they gave me a person that needed to be fixed, and it was real interesting because by the time I left, which was a year later, she was coming into work smiling every day, answering her phone with a pleasant voice, and going out of her way to help people. And it was all because according to her, I cared.
Okay.
You know, so in my opinion, I took a female approach to managing somebody. All she wanted was somebody to listen to her. But men, they don't consider that as part of their job, whereas women do. Women care about their employees and how they feel on the job. I'd say far more than men do. And we're probably a lot more perceptive to when to problems, whether or not they're causing problems at work. You just know they're there. So then after I left that job, I managed the business plan for 2 years, which is where I really, no, I left materials management and I moved to PQI, program and quality implementation, which is where I am now.
Which is supposed to be.
We integrate the product, which means, okay, that's okay. No, that's okay. Nobody understands what we do. If you look at a business, what you have is a bunch of functional activities. For example, engineering has a functional activity of designing the car and designing the tools necessary to make the parts. They design parts and design tools. Manufacturing uses the tools and the parts designed by engineering to put the car together. Materials uses those designs to go buy them and manage the logistics of getting them to the vehicle. Public relations advertises. Everybody has a task, okay? Nobody has the task of making all these people work together. All right? In a Japanese business, the processes that are entrenched and recognized and understood make everybody work together. Meaning that the engineer, if he's asked, how much does it cost to do a design change? There's a process that says, go ask the buyer. All right, now we have the vehicle development process that causes you to do that, but we also have program management, which is the program part of quality PQI. There's program and quality implementation. The program half, we're the liaison to the marketing divisions, so that the marketing divisions have a window into our organization. So we represent the needs of the customer, the ultimate customer. They ask us. That's half of program management. The other half of program management is to integrate the tasks performed by the functions to get all the arrows going in one direction. Instead of manufacturing is building an elephant while engineering is designing a lion, which is what we typically do. And over here, materials is sourcing an elephant. You know, so you got a lion design, an elephant sourced, and camel coming out the end of the line, you know, that looks sort of like a lion and a lot like an elephant. So our job, the program management part of our job, is to manage all those loose ends to make sure that they come together in an integrated product. And if you look at the latest readings on vehicle harmony, you know, how the car all works for you, the harmony of a vehicle, they say, is the direct result of the integration of the processes or the integrity of the processes that you use to produce it. So our job in program management is to develop those processes and execute them, you know, and manage the production of the car. It's a terrible job because by definition, we manage a whole bunch of people that don't work for us. That's by definition. So terrible, terrible job. But some people are well suited for it. The quality implementation half of PQI designs and does the same thing except with quality systems in the plants. Okay, so they go into the assembly plant and they're like consultants for what a quality system should be and what your quality process should be to get standardized quality processes across the entire organization. A standardized quality process may be just having processes that defines what you do. That is one of the elements of it. Another element of it is using data to make decisions versus emotions to make decisions. So the quality implementation half is taking a look at the processes by which we make sure our cars have quality and documenting them and standardizing and commonizing them. That's It is. That's where Deming would enter the organization, is through QI. So that's PQI. So when I entered PQI, I did so in the business planning arena. That used to be a financial staff task. And then they recognized that business planning, by definition, was an integrating type job, so that at the time I took the job, they moved it out of financial, where it was more of a how much money are we going to spend every year, moved it into PQI and made it more like what are the strategies we want to follow as a business, how much resources does it take, and what are the actions we're going to execute. Where do you want to head? Now, I wanted this job. This is the job I wanted when I came out of Harvard, but it didn't exist. We did not have a business plan. We didn't have a business plan, really, that anybody used until last year. And we had a mess. But we tried, as a manager in purchasing, I tried to work with this mess. I really believed in a business plan, so I tried to work with it. You just couldn't do it. So I went up and volunteered for the job of fixing it. I said, if I have to do this as a manager, then I want a shot at fixing it, because it is a mess. And that was the extent of my interview. And Don Costantino gave me the job. And that was what I did for the last 2 years. That started in January of 90 and ended in April of 92. And that was probably my most favorite job in the whole world. We ended up with a process as well as a plan. And I finally got recognized. I finally feel like I came on my own. I found what I was good at. And again, if you look in PQI, you'll find a lot of women. I'd say 50% of our workforce is women, because it's new. It's nothing that men want to do, because it's not traditional cars. And so you find a lot of women in there. Plus, women are good at this stuff. Women are good at integrating and motivating. Yep, that's what women are good at. I think that's what we're trained to do from the time we're young. But I've had a couple of interesting observations in doing that job. It was very, very difficult for me to learn that job, because I've never really had any team experience like men do. You know how men play football and they play basketball, and in order to work in an integrating capacity, you have got to play team, and you got to play it well, because if there's any individualism, especially on your part, you've had it. And the first year I did really bad. I almost failed. It was probably the second worst year of my entire life. The first one being as a development engineer. This was the second one. But what I did was I went out and joined a soccer team. I said, well, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to go learn team skills. Because when I was young, they didn't have teams for women like they do now. They didn't have anything you could learn, especially in the UP, and so everything I did always was individual. So I went out and joined a soccer team. Best training I ever did. Amazing. For how to learn how to play team was joining a soccer team. It's completely different from how we play team at General Motors. We play team like baseball. Everybody has their position. Nobody moves out of it. They just do their job. And the PQI is the coach. We try to make this baseball team operate as something that looks, well, soccer is completely different than that. Soccer is how the Japanese operate. Soccer, everybody kind of has a zone and they have a general skill, and the coach just kind of gives you the game plan up front and the strategy for how you're going to execute the game plan. Then you go out in the field and you play. And when somebody's out of position or they're weak or whatever, you automatically slide over and cover for them. That's true definition of team. And so that was like you asked about training, that's the best training. If anybody ever asked me how to learn how to play team, I'd tell them to go join a soccer team. So that really helped a lot. But also in this job, another thing I noticed was this women to women thing. I had a female secretary that had only worked for one other woman in her life and had quit that job because she couldn't work with a woman. And this was the first time I had ever realized that female secretaries to female bosses was a real problem with the older style secretaries. This is just my interpretation of the whole thing. This was a really bad scenario, the way it all played out. But my analysis of it looking back was we women are in positions because we've had to fight, claw, scratch, and become very competent at what we do. We don't talk about football. We don't talk about basketball. We don't fool around at work. You know, that's foreign to us. We don't do that. Whereas the men do. And what the men value in a secretary is completely different than what the women value in a secretary. I would never, I wouldn't even consider asking my secretary to handle my social schedule, for example, or a cup of coffee. That's not their job. And on one hand, you could say that a woman probably treats them with a little more respect. But to an old-time secretary, that's part of their job. You know, that's part of their deal. And the other thing I really noticed, which was interesting, is a lot of the skills that women learn to succeed with in the male environment don't work with a woman boss. So when you get a secretary that wants to relate to you as a boss in the typical male way, and that's not what you want, because you really get a clash. You really get a clash, because you know what I wanted was a secretary, and what she wanted was buddy. You know, the arrange your golf outings, and I mean I just couldn't even believe that she did this for the men. You know, and what I've learned is that, you know, you always used to look up to all these male bosses and think they walked on water, and now when you're there and you realize the inefficiencies and how they misuse the system, it's very disappointing. I mean, you could argue that it's more efficient for them to do it for you than for you to do it yourself, but you know, I just can't agree with that. It's not business. It was not, you know, I'm very black and white. If it's not business, they don't do it. Yeah. And so I held the secretary accountable for doing what her real job was, which was setting up meetings, filing, answering phones, that secretarial stuff. Well, she hadn't done that in years.
Yeah.
You know, she was the social.
Who had done that?
Well, it wasn't her main job. And because she was so good at all this other stuff, the guys had just overlooked all the rest of this stuff. Well, she did it, she just didn't do it well. So I started holding her accountable for the wellness of how she did that stuff, not the wellness of how she organized my personal life. I didn't care. You know, I organized my personal life for 37 years. I can keep doing it, you know. And so we got into a big clash about that. And it was really a letdown from having gone from purchasing, where this one woman had really turned around, and because everyone else had tried to hold her accountable for their personal stuff, and this was part of her problem. She didn't want to do that. She wanted to be a secretary. When she started working for me, and all I wanted was a secretary, we worked fine. Yeah, she wanted to come with me. So I left the situation where I had a secretary that wanted to come with me because she liked working for me so much, and got into a situation where the secretary refused to work for me and said she'd quit General Motors if she had to keep working for me. And I'm like going, whoa, wait a minute, you know, what did I do wrong here? Well, the men basically sided with her instead of me, and that just...
Because they were used to that kind of a person.
Yeah, and it turned into a mess. And because we don't work real well to data and criteria, you know, there wasn't a documented, this is your job. You know, I mean, because if you documented what her job was, and if you looked at what I was complaining about, she wasn't doing her job. But, you know, all this other stuff that she did real well wasn't part of her job. But it was accepted for so long that it became...
Mohr of 6407 West Reynolds in Haslett, Michigan. The recording was made on June 9, 1992 by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River. This is tape number 3 of 3 tapes.
So actually, the point of all that was that the skills that women learn through the system to deal with issues don't work when they start working with a woman, because and it reminds you of girls playing together in a sandbox, you know, where, I mean, the secretary still won't talk to me. This is 2 years later. You know, she won't say good morning. Oh yeah, she, you know, and It took me a while to forgive her because it was, I mean, it was a black period in my life. And it ended up turning out that once they moved her away from me, the situation didn't fix itself. So over a course of 4 or 5 months, it was clear where the problem really was. So that absolved me of the, you know, the responsibility, but it's still to have to go through that proving yourself all over again. It was just a hassle. But this is just an observation that I've noticed again, because I have another female employee that obviously she's very technical. She is technically proficient, but what she's more proficient on is manipulation. And that's what women learn. That's one of the skills women learn. And it works real well with men, with male supervisors. You can wrap them around your finger. And this is the same thing the secretary was trying to do. And I now have a female employee that's, in my analysis, basically how she is where she is, because she's so difficult to work around. And men don't know how to do it. You know, this is an interesting male-female thing. You know, men do not know how to manage women that play those little girl sandbox games. Whereas women, we were raised with that stuff. You know, when a girl started pouting, I just says, when you want to play, come back. Now a man would go, oh, don't feel bad. You know, what did I say to hurt your feelings? And then they get their way. So I'm struggling with that same issue right now. And that secretary she's still doing it. She's waiting for me to come back and say, oh, don't feel bad. And I'll never do that. It's not professional. But, you know, so then you argue, well, you know, if I adopted the male method of dealing with things, and, you know, or is it that the women method just doesn't work, you know, because granted, you know, you can't respect when you see women doing what they do. It's hard to respect it because, you know, men just tend to be far more logical and far more fact-based, whereas women tend to be more emotional. And you really have to stand back and say, where do emotions fit in business? And there's a lot of places for it to fit, but typically they're not places that are held of any value by the organization. And so what ends up happening is we put technically proficient women that are emotionally based in situations where it's not acceptable to work by emotion. And so they're just continually under stress. Now, I guess I'm one of the more fortunate ones because I am very emotional, but I'm also very logical. So I can flip either way. You know, I take things personally. That's the emotional part of me, but I don't try to use emotion to communicate with. I use data and logic and technical because I'm an engineer. But I've had several women working for me now, and I see their different way of approaching tasks. And I'm more of a male thinker than I am a female thinker, and I can't relate to them. So I can relate to them from the standpoint of being a woman, but from the standpoint of being a professional business person, it's hard for me to relate to how they think and to have confidence that they can do the job. So when I see that I think that way, I wonder, God, how does a man think that hasn't been brought up with sandbox games, you know, from girls? Because there's no way that they would even understand that they can have confidence that this woman just has a different way of doing things. And so, you know, it seems to be a potentially structural problem with women being successful. If you don't change to think like a man and behave like a man, how can you really be successful? That's I guess the end of my story is like, is it possible in the way that we're structured? Because where these women really fit is in the OD places, the training, the nurturing type stuff. But that's not, it's not going to get them anywhere. So you got bright women that are going to get stifled because you can't get ahead in those fields.
Do we need something back at the training institution that helps females get over that hump somehow?
Well, if you want to change the way, you know, it starts at birth. You know, as I understand it, you know, by the time girls are 6 months old, they're picking up dolls and boys are picking up trucks. and boys are putting Tinker Toys together and girls are changing diapers. So it starts that young.
But to get it back somehow, it's going to take some work.
Yeah. Well, see, I think we're wrong as American business in thinking that the value is in the male way of doing things. Because, I mean, we're certainly not being successful.
Yeah.
So, we're not as successful as we could be, and I would argue that's because we don't accept diversity enough. And the women's way is far more accepting and far more tolerant of change and of difference and of putting in place the necessary environment to make people feel comfortable with change. So, the company of the future that's going to be successful is going to have to be one that adapts to change faster and has a workforce that is more fluid. And if you look at, the whole way I've laid this whole thing out, it's like where, the men are just so fixed and positioned and stuck in a rut. And the women, are out here more light, like more like butterflies, I guess. You're like, okay, I'll land here for a while and work on this. Oh, you want me to go work there? Yeah, I can do that. Now, not all women are that way, but if you look at the spectrum, you got a gray zone, which is probably where you'd like everybody to be. And, there's probably more women in that gray zone right now than there are men, or at least men aren't allowed to show that they're like that because it's not respected. The culture is way down here, and the women are way up here, and this gray zone is probably where you want it to be, and we got to move the culture to fit here. And then these women have to adjust, and these men have to adjust. And right now, it's all this way. And it's gradually changing, but I don't think it's changing very fast at all.
It's a generational sort of.
That's why, I can say with, very honesty that I don't really care how much higher I go, because I don't want to deal with the issues. It's kind of like let another wave of women deal with this shit. I'm tired. I am tired.
Yeah.
I'm tired of, I'm not even way out here. I'm somewhere in here, probably even more towards this end than I am towards that end. And I'm real tired of pulling this anchor. And that's what it is. It's an anchor. And then the problem is it's an anchor from here all the way down, because it just isn't, it doesn't change. Yeah.
Stuck in it. And it will take a generation for them to change it. But you've been here a generation, correct?
15 years. A lot of the problem is just the systems and the processes, and it's society too. I still don't think.
It's not just General Motors.
No, it's the whole thing. But, I'd be interested in the statistic of what our percentage of women engineers in the workforce are now compared to what they were, and at what levels. If you look at Oldsmobile or LAD, there are only 3 women unclassified employees. I may be wrong, there may be 4. But just a couple months ago, there were only 2. And that was Sherry Alexander and Lori Schuchak. Then Sherry moved to France, there was only 1. And I think Anita Riddle Johnson is an unclassified, but I'm not sure. But when you look at an organization of 27,000 people, and all the women engineers that have come in, just forget engineers, the women in the workforce, what the percentage of that 27,000 is, and the fact that none of them have broken through level 1. That ought to tell somebody that something's not right, because it can't have anything to do with skill. It's got to have a lot of other things involved with it. So, it's all still there. It's just not as obvious. So.
Well, out of all that mess, Susan, who was the best boss?
Who was the best boss? Wow. That's really tough. It's a tie. That's a good
That's a
cop
good
out,
way to
isn't
do
it?
it, yeah.
No, I don't know. It's either Al Canton or Don Costantino. Don is my current boss, and I guess I have to say he's the best, primarily because he recognized he's open to unique kinds of individuals, and in fact, searches them out, and he recognizes what they're good at and supports that instead of asking them to do something to change themselves. He finds the jobs that the people are good for instead of saying, if you're that good, you ought to be able to do anything, which to me is the new way of thinking. It has to be the new way of thinking. And I personally owe a lot to him because I am not real successful in these traditional things because the system bogs me down way too much. But I mean, I have worked directly for him. I don't report to anybody else. I reported directly to him for 2 years in the business plan. And then when I got this latest job, I report directly to him again. So by his choice, I keep reporting directly to him. And he has been able to peg what I do real well and what I don't do real well and find positions that, are that I can really add value to the company that use my skill. And so from that standpoint as a manager, he's got a lot of faults. I mean, everybody has a lot of faults. And that's why it's hard for me to say he's the best, because when you say the best, you want somebody that's perfect. But yeah, I guess that my criteria for the best would be somebody that really looks at their people, recognizes what they're capable of, and puts them in positions where they can really do well. And that's what Don has done. He's done that for me. Now, I say Al Canton because Al was my first boss, probably that really was accepting of me as a professional person and also bent over backwards in support of me. Al was the first boss that I have to say that I would do anything for. And I'd still do anything for Al. If Al came to work for me today, I don't care. I mean, if I worked for him today, I don't care what he asked me to do. In fact, I feel that way about Don too. If they ask me to do it, I'll go do it. And to me, that is the sign of a good boss. For years, until I started working for Don, for years, all my decisions I made as a supervisor or leading to my supervisory rank was, how can I be like Al? Okay. I did that. I picked him out as this is my model of what I want to be like when I become a supervisor. And Al was it. The difference between Al and Don is Al is probably a lot more organized and a lot more structured because he's an engineer, whereas Don is more loose and big pictured and that kind of stuff. And I have trouble with that. But Don has pushed me to limits that I didn't know I was capable of. So yeah. So Don is, he's very insightful, and Al is just he does something to motivate people to climb the highest mountain to meet what he needs to have done. And so, it's like, okay, which is the best criteria? I don't know. You take a blend of both, and so now I'm blending. Yeah, now I'm blending the two of them. When I say, who do I want to pattern myself off of, it's, I blend the two of them. Because I thought Al walked on water, and then I started working for Don. I went, wow, there's some things missing over here, Al. Now I'll do these things. But I hold the two of those guys. Actually, a better question to ask is who are the people that you've run across with that make you feel like General Motors is going to survive? Because it's not a question of who's the best boss. It's what makes you come to work every day. And you're not going to come to work for a losing team, no matter what you say. And to me, what it's going to take to survive in the future are people that are willing to change, are not scared of it, and just embrace change as a way of life, as opposed to looking for ways that we can't improve. And the two bosses, I guess, that I see are, that's what I really value in them. as opposed to, you just run across so many other people. It drives you crazy. I mean, I've got a whole work group full of them right now. You ask a question, and the first thing out of their mouth is, well, we can't because. Yeah. And it's like, strike that. I won't hear that anymore. Yeah, well, what can we do? And it's very frustrating. We have a scary culture in this organization where we're always waiting for the other person to do the job instead of just saying, well, maybe they're too busy. Why don't we just do it for them? It's the soccer team approach, and as opposed to the football team approach, where, I mean, that's a little more advanced than baseball, but, we definitely have to play soccer, and we have barely learned how to play baseball.
Now, how about your views on reorganization?
Right now, which one?
Begin.
The 84 one. I think I wouldn't have been able to answer this question had I not gone to Harvard Business School.
Okay.
Because the 84 one, with that perspective, was good.
Okay.
They made some mistakes. The BOC group and the CPC group was dumb. It was an issue of, what do we do with all these unclassifieds, that are here.
Fisher and GNA,
And they didn't change fast enough. But this is the whole thing I'm talking about with change. You got to change. The concept of creating an operating arm and a marketing arm to the organization, I think, is structurally sound. It's the way we did it. We did BOC group and called them the big car luxury group, and then put JLN in there. That didn't make sense. We did CPC group, called them small and compact, and then they build A&W cars. So the reorganization itself was good. What's lacking is a market segmentation plan. We haven't gone out and said, here's all the customers, here's all the products we're going to produce generally, to meet this grid, and here's the structure we have to support it. We're fumbling around creating structure without understanding where we're going. And that was the flaw in reorganization number one, so, in my opinion. And we struggled with that, for 5 or 6 years, And now the reorganization, I think, is good because it gets rid of BOC and CPC, and I saw that as a fundamental flaw before. The concern I have, though, is with the centralization of all the stuff that's going on. I see us structurally designing ourselves to be a small company, a much smaller company than we are right now. And you could argue that that's what you have to do before you can grow big again. But I guess I don't see it that way at all. I think that there's such a push now towards centralization that they're not really doing it based on data. Like the materials management organization, where they're centralizing all the purchasing. Now that I can buy into. Okay, I can buy into purchasing being a central function, but production control and transportation and logistics, that is very tied to an operations unit. And so you just question whether it's effective to do it that way. And then it's kind of scary because you go, our processes right now are completely unstable. And instead of stabilizing the process, they're changing it again. They're adding a variation which I don't think is necessary to accomplish the task. If the task is to obtain coordinated purchasing to leverage the dollars that you can get from having coordinated purchasing, then coordinate purchasing. But you don't need to centralize purchasing to do that necessarily. What happens when you centralize purchasing, now you look at our whole vehicle development process, and what happens? Who you go back to that original question, the release engineer that the earth revolves around, he needs to know how much it costs to buy a part. Who does he call?
And this guy's 100 miles down the road somewhere and doesn't care.
Yeah, who does he call? And you can't tell me that with our culture, we're going to put a process in place right away to tell this person who to call. So the objective is to get standard processes and standard procedures across the corporation. The prevailing view is the only way to do that is through centralization. And that's one view. That's certainly one view. The other view is that you accomplish that by saying we're going to do this, and you bring all this matrix stuff together, just like we did on the business plan. You leave people where they need to be to do their jobs. You matrix them and say, we will centralize. You guys have no choice. It's kind of like we're trying to fix the personalities and the politics. Instead of hitting them head on, we're saying, okay, we're just going to absorb you. Because we couldn't do it, this Lopez couldn't tell Harold Kuttner that you will standardize and have Harold Kuttner believe him and do something with it. So because Harold was a roadblock, okay, let's remove Harold and adopt purchasing. I'm just using Harold as an example, but that's happening all over the corporation. We couldn't make the allied divisional relationships work, so what do? Centralize them all. And so instead of changing the culture, we're just changing the process again. Yeah. And that's not going to do anything to change the culture, but it will add variation to the process and reduce the whole stability to a process that wasn't in control in the first place. Yeah, I mean, lesson number one of quality management is you get a process in control regardless. Then once the process is in control, now you start inducing variation into it and figuring out what works and what doesn't work, because then you monitor the impact of the process. So basically, we made one reorganization, never got in control. Now we're making another reorganization, and I don't know how they could be doing that based on data, because they never had a process in control to collect data on. So, generically, when they first laid it out, I said, this is great. We're headed in the right direction.
Oh, Susan. Hi.
Are you in here?
Well, for the moment.
Oh,
Apparently they're having trouble with one of these.
okay.
Oh, we're almost done.
Well,
Be quiet, we're recording.
oh, are you?
So generically, I see us headed in the right direction when they made the original announcement. But the execution, they're carried away. They've gone too far with what they're doing with the centralization. I mean, they should have stopped, and just got the platforms under one group and the marketing under one group and the planning under one group. They should have just stopped right there, get that under control, identify what the problems are, and then go forward. So it's scary that we're making all these changes once again, and before we even really know what the problem was in the first place. So that's how I feel about that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure that you talked to a Bob Cook or something.
Interesting variation.
Yeah.
What else? Anything else you can think of?
Geez, I don't know. I feel like I told you my life story. No, I can't think of anything. I can't believe I thought of all these things.
I said it works. It always works.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. Good job.
Did it meet your needs?
Oh, sure. Excellent. Shall we quit?
Yeah, I'm done. I'm talked out.